is 7:01 p.m. and we will bring this meeting of the City of Kenmore Planning Commission to order. And the first item of business is citizen comments. Do we have any of our citizens here to share anything with us?
We have zero. Oh, we have one attendee. Hold on. This is a commissioner. One second. I'm going to promote him to panelist. Okay. No, it looks like we have zero attendees tonight so far.
Okay. Okay, there being no citizen comments, our next item is approval of the minutes. So why don't we start with the March 2nd Planning Commission meeting minutes. So do I hear a motion on that set of minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second to approve the March 2nd Planning Commission meeting minutes. Any discussion on those minutes? Okay, hearing none. Rita, I think we need to take a roll call on this, right?
Yes.
So,
Commissioner Vanderline?
oh, he's coming back.
I think he said yes.
I thought I heard a yes, but I was looking down at my paper, so. Commissioner Greathouse?
Yes.
Commissioner Banazinski?
Yes.
Commissioner Lutsis?
Yes.
Chair Orenshaw?
Yes.
Commissioner Olson?
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson? Thank you.
Okay, it looks like that passed unanimously. So our next item is approval of the April 7th Planning Commission meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion on those minutes?
So moved. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the April 7th Planning Commission meeting minutes. Any discussion on that motion? All right, seeing none. Rita, can you do the roll call again, please?
Yes. Commissioner Thompson? Thank you. Commissioner Olson?
Yes.
Chair Orenshaw?
Yes.
Commissioner Lutsis?
Yes.
Commissioner Banazinski?
Yes.
Commissioner Greathouse?
Yes.
Commissioner Vanderland?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we have the minutes approved for both those meetings, and it looks like the next agenda item is a discussion of Joe Minicozzi. So, Lori and Debbie, do you want to take us away from here?
Sure. So tonight there are 3 items on your business agenda. The first is a discussion of and reactions to the Joe Minicozzi presentation that you heard on April 7th. And then the second thing we'll talk about is the additional information that you had requested. There's a memo that includes additional information and then a couple of other points. And then lastly, we'll give a really brief introduction to the countywide planning policies, and those will be the subject of your May 4th Planning Commission meeting. So if you want to turn to the Joe Minicozzi presentation, I hope all of you enjoyed the presentation. And obviously his focus is on tax policy and how different types of development impact city finances. I have a few takeaways, but this is your time to share with each other what you thought of the presentation. And Debbie, I don't know if you have anything to add, or we'll just turn it over to the Planning Commission.
No, I think we're interested in hearing your reactions and kind of some points that really stuck with you, and especially those that you think might be helpful as we move forward with the comp plan update.
All right, well, why don't we open it to whoever cares to share some takeaways?
Well, I thought that he spent a lot of time talking about how things pencil out and the benefits of developing one area over another, and just having a very clear idea of what your city looks like and where you're spending your money, and how different development would enhance your bottom line, and all of the interrelationships of different things. And so I'm curious. I'm sure that you all take those into consideration when you're doing your planning. And so, was any of that a surprise to you? Do you feel like the city does all of that? I'm just kind of interested in how Kenmore fits into the whole paradigm that he was describing.
Is that a question for staff or for
Yep.
your fellow commissioners?
Well, for both, if they have comments on that or
Yeah.
related thoughts, and then getting input from staff would be great.
Sure.
Well, I'll jump in. I think he's a very impressive speaker and certainly has good experience. I was very impressed and continue to be and they did some additional reading even beforehand in some of his earlier works, and also looking at some of the other cities pieces that are out there. I think there's a good point here that he makes about cities' finances, and particularly what in business we call depreciation, and cities' inability or sometimes lack of taking that into account, the long-term cost of maintaining development. And when you get into massive or large developments or redevelopments or even small ones, there is a leg to and runoff to those costs into the future that has to be faced. I'm not sure whether Kenmore is in the sort of crisis situation he described about when you get 20, 30 years out. I know the time that I spent in the development committee meeting, there was a lot of discussion about the budget and where the structural deficit comes from. And the city has begun, I believe, to begin to put aside dollars to handle that future expense. Whether that's going to be adequate or not is an open question. And maybe some of the motivation, what we have to take into account as we look at land use and rezoning, is how do we deal with that crisis that may be looming out there 20 to 30 years. We may be okay in terms of the structural deficit over the next 6 or 7 years. We may have fixed that, but where does that go into the future? And is there continue to be a structural deficit that that needs to be addressed, perhaps in part through zoning? On the other side, I found it difficult to connect some of the financial stuff, which I thought was very strong, to some of the conclusions about how you develop and what preference cities should take in development, particularly when you're talking about increased density. And I think using ancient cities in the way they developed and how very old cities, both in Europe and even in the East Coast United States, what they look like today is necessarily the model for where we'd want to go, or that it's somehow preferable. I think modern world folks may have a very different view of what's acceptable and what their preferences are in terms of how they live and how their cities are organized. So I think there's some interesting discussion there. So I'll stop there. Let somebody else talk.
I thought it was fantastic. I thought he was incredibly engaging. It was super informative. I know his focus was on the financial health of cities, but I came to feel, kind of as I listened to him talk, that our financial health is interconnected with our environmental sustainability, with the social fabric, the health of the social fabric of our community. So I thought the vision that he described could provide a lot of good food for thought for us in Kenmore when combined with an environment and climate lens and an equity lens. I think I saw a lot of fantastic possibility there, and I got really excited about it.
Yeah, one thing I think those are all really good points. One thing I found kind of interesting, certainly, I think if I read one of the slides right, the mixed use is one of the biggest forms of tax revenue in terms of, in terms of new development versus the big box, and how single family, basically are subsidizing, the rest of the, or is being subsidized. So, but I was also curious, and I think it came up in our meeting packet, and there was some discussion points about some difficulties getting lending for mixed use. And so I guess maybe this is more of a question for Lori and Debbie, perhaps others. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of zoning that's supporting mixed use, especially in the, the central core there. But if there are financing issues for that right now, how do we move towards that? I was just kind of struck by that paradox, if you will. So.
And dovetailing that.
Well,
You want to go ahead, Lori?
I was just going to say, the comment about difficulty financing mixed use was one development on SR 522, and we don't know the full story behind that picture. So I don't think I would feel completely comfortable saying it's difficult to finance mixed use right now. Certainly in the last several years, we've seen a lot of mixed use financed in the downtown. So I don't think from that one development that we could make that leap.
I was going to say, dovetailing with Chair Orenshaw's point, that I think the place that we've arrived is because of our zoning regulations, but also because of other factors that, changing zoning regulations wouldn't address, like the financing, like parking requirements, things like that. So it's a multi-pronged approach, I think, that we need to take to developing our community, and zoning is just one part of it.
Any other kind of open thoughts people may have?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Nathan.
I was going to say, for the part that I was there for, I've had some technical difficulties that evening, but I was there for the last portion, and the way he presented it and the case study about, the Costco and Target versus the more focused development made a lot of sense financially too, for the city as well. He talked about it being an investment. And I know Kenmore really prides itself on maintaining, that kind of single family residence and that nice residential neighborhood atmosphere. And I think that really intertwines with this as well. If you can focus development in one area, then it's less likely to impact some of the other areas around the city, while also being very financially beneficial for the city too, by increasing, revenue through taxes and more people to the city itself. So that stuck out to me in what was most interesting.
Well, I would agree with you, Nathan, that I think that that's a good perspective based on what he was talking about. One of the difficulties that we're going to have, and that the city councils are going to have over the next 10 years, is where's the line going to be drawn of where the mixed use is and where's the density going to go to make all of that happen. And if we decide that single family housing is important to Kenmore and what we want to, a part of that is what we want to preserve, then the trade-off is going to have to be, we have to be able to zone some parts of Kenmore for upscale development, whether it's mixed use or whatever we want to call it. But I think from the environmental side and from our neighborhood side, we don't want to sprawl. It's kind of like what the urban growth line is to the county. Well, we have to, my perspective is maybe we need an urban growth line in Kenmore, where both from an environmental side and from the way our community believes that we should look in some of our neighborhoods, that we have to draw a line and say, we're going to do it one way on this side of the line and another way on the other side of the line. That may be simplistic, but on the other hand, the politics of how people feel and how they love and how they see Kenmore that's how it works. I don't see it as all about, unfortunately, dollars and cents, because a lot of our citizens may not quite see it that way. You know, to draw a comparison is if you look at what this whole mess that this fire district has caused, where they've got both districts wanted to go together, and then all of a sudden they passed the ballot measure, and then they both went against it, and now we have both city governments against it, and the fact is that Woodinville, there's Bothell between Woodinville and Kenmore and Lake Forest Park. Something went wrong there, and that's the kind of political and economical and community decision that I think we as a planning commission, we don't want to end up at that kind of a situation, making that kind of a decision, because that you know, the more I looked at it, the more crazy in some ways how the whole thing got to be on the ballot, and then everybody backed off from it. And just, we can do better. I believe that this body and the city council can do better than that. And that's what I think our citizens are asking for us, from us. And so I guess that's another perspective of mine. But you know, urban growth is a big deal, and drawing those lines and what's going to happen to our environment and our single family communities is a big deal in the city of Kenmore.
As an environmentalist, I found his talk incredibly hopeful, because I felt like if we can build more density where it's appropriate, and the kind of density that is financially sustainable, we can protect our critical areas, I think, better than perhaps we have been, or even better than we have been. So I found that a hopeful story.
Yeah, I found it interesting too that he was, you know, he was very bullish on the future of increased density and urbanism, even in the, you know, the face of the pandemic, when there may be some other people thinking otherwise. But he seemed very, very sure that was going to continue to, you know, to be the future. So.
I think we're going to have to spend some time and understand, or at least personally, I want to understand what the trade-offs are. You know, what are the decisions? What is it we're seeking? What are our goals? Clearly, you know, the things that we hear are things like affordable housing, a sustainable financial budget. And then there's this thing that caused all of us to actually want to move to Kenmore and live here, which is livability. I mean, that was the big reason. That was the big plus for the city. That's something we all look at with pride. To what extent do we have to give up some of that in order to get more affordable housing, or to get a financially stable city? And to get a financially stable city, what's the trade-off between increased density, which would increase the tax base, versus higher taxes on the existing base? There are all kinds of trade-offs here. And I think this is something, and I think maybe this is where Dwight was going, and I think we agree with this, is we need to understand what the choices of the current citizens of Kenmore are, because they're the ones that are literally going to pay the price. We want to preserve the parks and the natural environment we have. We have lots of other goals, but clearly you are not going to be able to do everything. There's going to have to be give. And those are the sorts of choices I think that a city council can help with and can provide leadership with, and hopefully we can help with that too. But ultimately we need to understand when we give the decision back to the citizens, because they're the ones who are going to live with it in the long run.
Lori and Debbie, you want to step in and share your takeaways from?
Sure. I mean, I think this is sort of a very practical takeaway is that infrastructure is expensive. Roads, parking is expensive over the long term, especially if it's the kind of infrastructure which is transferred to the city for long-term maintenance. So to me, that is something which you can do something about in practical terms, in land use terms, to think about that. About the reducing parking requirements, reducing road widths. There's a couple of examples there. So that's sort of a practical thing I took away. And the other practical thing was whether it's mixed use or housing types, that sometimes smaller has more financial sense, has a better return. And some of the actual numbers that he showed to demonstrate that were surprising. Well, not surprising, but it's not really intuitive. And I think the Walmart example was one of them. Intuitively, you might think that had a better return than a small retail or a small mixed-use building, and he clearly demonstrated that wasn't the case. So again, that's some sort of practical land use things you can consider. I also think that what he was saying in terms of housing types lines up really well with some of the missing middle housing discussions that we'll be having. So again, I think looking at the missing middle and him putting the financial side to that was also very interesting, and sort of another piece when we're having that discussion with the community as why are we having that and why might it make sense, whether it's for affordability. But again, there's also this sort of return financial side, which I thought was interesting. So those are sort of some practical things that I heard that I think might be relevant as we move forward with this topic.
Yeah, I heard, I shared Debbie's thoughts. There was one part, well, this whole idea of thickening up a community to provide more return to cover infrastructure. So rather than build a lot of new infrastructure, utilize the existing infrastructure more effectively. I thought that was interesting. And then he had, there was one image where he showed, he has those almost topographic examples of who's paying most taxes, and he was talking about sort of like baby steps. And I thought, he drew some little circles on his map and said, well, you could thicken up in these places. And I immediately thought of the council's interest in sort of small nodes of commercial or mixed use development in neighborhoods. So that beyond the things that Debbie mentioned, that really captured my attention.
Yeah, well, are there, Lori and Debbie, did you hope to, do you have enough, I guess, thoughts? This was really, I think, a really important exercise to kind of share takeaways. Is there anything more you want from us in terms of his presentation and how we might, incorporate that going forward?
I don't think so. Debbie may have a different perspective, but my view, all the things we've been doing over the last several weeks are sort of providing different perspectives on growth and how growth might happen in the community. We have all the demographic information, and we have the land use information, and now we have some information on city finances. And what we're hoping is that this background is going to make it easier as we enter into specific policy discussions that we'll have a better understanding of the implications of what we're doing or why we need to do something.
I agree. I think that was sort of the main part, the main reason for this is that also it makes you think a little bit more. So I think it's sort of, I guess, being able to have a broader perspective when we'll be having some of these challenging policy discussions, and to be able to sort of figure out that there are some complex things that are being balanced, and the information that we've been giving you over the last few weeks is sort of giving you the information that you can kind of have that discussion and make that balance. Because as you know, when you're making difficult choices, not everybody is going to be happy about it. And I think it's unrealistic to hope that a policy decision might sort of land with everybody being on board. But I think the Planning Commission then has to make sure that the public has enough information to understand the challenges around these policy decisions and what has to be balanced and what those trade-offs are. So I think that's why we've given you this information, because again, we'll be having this dialogue with the community as well.
Can I say one more thing? One more thought
Sure.
about the presentation. So I don't know that this was a strong undercurrent throughout, but I feel I got it, a subtext of it at least, and I think it did come up a little bit directly in Joe's presentation about the idea of designing our communities for people. I really appreciated that idea, and that's something that I'd like to think about for our Kenmore's future too, is how much are we designing for people? How much are we designing for vehicles? Things like that. And I don't think that we necessarily need to look like communities did 100 years ago or thousands of years ago, but maybe there are some good lessons there for us, things that we've kind of dropped along the way that we want to pick up again. And we don't have to pick up, those templates wholesale and reuse them, but I think there could be some good lessons.
Okay, well, I guess unless there's anything more anybody else wants to share, we can move on to the next item. Any kind of final thoughts anybody wants to share at this point? All right, looks like we're ready for the next item then, Lori and Debbie.
Okay. Well, so this is the first staff memo is what I want to touch on. That was in your materials, and it's kind of a hodgepodge, frankly. There's a lot of information in that memo, many different topics, but the first part of the memo was providing responses to questions that you have had at previous meetings. So for example, how many homeless folks are there in Kenmore? What are the income bands of our neighboring cities? What is the age of the housing stock? Those were all questions that you asked about at previous meetings. So where we have Kenmore specific information, it's included. Where we don't, we're using North County or whatever the relevant measure is to try to get close. And so I'd start there by saying, were there any of those items that you had questions about from that memo?
I was really happy to see the answers to all these questions. I think it's really helpful. There was nothing that I had further questions about or that much that was too surprising, but it was good to have it all in one place.
Great.
I was glad to see that Brian Hampson is going to be talking to the Kenmore Urban Project developer.
Right.
Yeah, I was really happy about that. That's good.
Yeah. So if there aren't any more questions about the data, it's pretty self-explanatory. The next part of the memo was actually just some news from Bothell, and the city manager had forwarded this to us. And it's just a note that Bothell has now approved duplexes on corner lots. Bothell participated in some state grant funding that was a way to tackle missing middle housing. And so this was their first step at doing that. So it was an interesting article, and they also were looking at short plat, the number of lots in a short plat. Kenmore has had the highest number of lots you can have in a short plat for years. So we're ahead of the game there. We don't need to make that change. But that was just informational. And then the last part of the memo is really talking about the public participation plan and community survey. So last night on the city council agenda, the council authorized the contract with, the firm is called PRR. And so we will be signing a contract with them this week and then meeting with them soon. And they have really 3 charges. One is to develop a logo and a brand for the overall comprehensive plan update. This is something that will follow the project all the way through until adoption in 2024. So next year when the transportation element comes up, and when the public services and the utilities elements come up, surface water, etc. This logo is to give the community a sense that this is an ongoing project and let them know that it's what it's related to, the comprehensive plan update. So they're going to be doing that, and then they're going to be doing a community survey. There's going to be a notice that goes to every household in the city, inviting residents to participate in the survey. The survey will be online, although there is also a call-in option for those who don't have access to a computer. So, and then there'll be a follow-up. There'll be the initial request to participate, and then there'll be another follow-up request to participate. And then the third piece of this project is to develop a public participation plan. And you all will remember when we were talking about trade-offs and trying to identify trade-offs and that really valuable information that can help us sort of refine what the community is interested in. And so the PRR team has a survey expert, and we spent a lot of time talking about what comes first, the public participation education piece, or do we do a survey first and then we figure out where we need to do public education? And after really going round and round about it, the conclusion was that it would be more effective in terms of getting the community involved to do a survey initially and then see where the community's positions are, and then use those to craft the public participation plan if we need to do education or we need to involve certain people, or it just is going to help us refine the public participation. And then there's potentially an opportunity to do a second survey many months down the road if we find that we need that. But that is the proposal, and the public participation plan will be coming forward to you to take a look at after we get the initial reaction from the community. So are there any questions about that?
So Lori, will we see the survey before it's distributed to the public or after?
I would guess probably after. I think that we are probably not going to be in a position that we would have the commission work on the wordsmithing of the survey.
Mhm.
We're hiring these PhDs who are survey experts to help us ask questions in a way that's going to solicit the input that we're interested in based on what you all said. I think we talked about it over 2 meetings about trade-offs and that kind of thing.
I have a question about the initial survey. I was glad that there will be an emphasis on overall in this process on involving historically underrepresented communities. And I wondered about that in the context of the mailer for the surveys. Like, is that,
Right.
is it historically in Kenmore, has that been a way to reach a broad, diverse types of households?
So we have done one other broad community mailer that was over the accessory dwelling unit questions. So, and we got a great response. I mean, people were very engaged. So the survey will be both in English and Spanish. Spanish is our most prevalent language. And again, it would go to every household. And then the consultants are working. They've talked about a strategy wherein they would connect with groups representing historically disadvantaged community members. So I don't know whether that's churches or community organizations, but we're not there yet. But that's definitely a charge to make sure that those communities are welcomed and encouraged to participate.
Yeah, so in the past,
I don't know if that answers the question, but it will be in Spanish.
yeah, I think it reassures me that this will be an accessible process for, you know, our community as a whole. I just wondered if a mailer would like reached more affluent households, or if you got the same kind of response rate from lower income households, for example. You know, if that doing a mailer is really reaching a broad number of people. That's what I wondered about that. If that was going to be the only way that the survey was going to be distributed.
Right. Well, the mailer actually is not distributing the survey. The mailer is inviting participation.
Yeah.
And then that's where you either have the online option or the call-in option,
right,
to give your feedback. And they will have interpreters available.
Okay, thank you.
Is that a one-time mailing, Lori, or will there be multiple mailings to that?
So it'll be a one-time mailing to every household in Kenmore. And then a few weeks later, there will be a second mailing saying, hey, you forgot, you know, or we hope you'll participate.
Good, yeah.
So there'll be 2 touches to every household in Kenmore.
Great. That sounds really good. And I see through other city communications vehicles, you'll also be getting that information out, right? Yeah.
And that will be, the survey itself will be, will reflect the branding effort. So this is kind of going to be our big splashy, you know, time to talk about land use and housing, or however, that's pretty boring, but we will make it jazzy, and then it'll be branded, and we hope that we can, you know, encourage the community to participate.
And just real quickly to follow up on Mike's point. So yeah, I see the process all makes sense. The themes and ideas and trade-offs that we raise will basically be incorporated into the survey questions, it sounds like, right? So so we have had that form of input into this survey in that way.
Right. And again, the purpose is to get some information on the community's vision. What are the important things to the community, but also where are we needing to encourage participation or provide education, or where are our areas that need emphasis and more effort.
Will these, don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, will these be anonymous surveys, or will there be any kind of, you know, I don't demographic tracking of, you know, like who's filling it out, you know, in which neighborhoods, or is there any kind of, or is it just a general citywide approach to that?
I would guess it would be a citywide approach, but we haven't even begun to talk about it. Again, the contract was approved last night. We're setting up our initial meetings with the survey team, and I'm going to talk about what it is we're trying to achieve. And then they'll give us some insights on how best to do that.
Okay.
But you want to try and get the survey results that represent the community. So
right.
And that's why you know, that's why we hired these consultants with the expertise to be able to design the survey, write the questions in a way that you're not leading people, and also then to be able to make sure that it's a statistically valid survey that is representative of the community.
Right.
Great. Exactly what I was thinking. Much more eloquently said. Thank you, Debbie. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay, anything more on that item for us tonight? Any other comments from my colleagues here?
I want to thank the staff for putting together the answers to those questions. I think they're going to be extremely valuable as we get a little deeper into the weeds here. The fact that you're not hearing any direct questions on them right now, I wouldn't take that as an indication we don't see it as valuable. Quite the contrary. I had lots of stuff that came to mind, but I don't want to bring it up until we get a little further along and
Yeah.
it becomes more appropriate. But thank you. I think that's going to be very useful.
Yeah.
Oh, good. All right, well, if we're through there, turning to the second staff memo, which was very brief. So the King County countywide planning policies were issued about a week and a half ago at the end of March, and they are in draft. And these countywide planning policies, like you'll remember, we looked at Vision 2050. Those are the multi-county planning policies. This is all nested together. So we have to conform to the multi-county planning policies. Now we have to conform to the King County countywide planning policies, and then we'll come to our comprehensive plan. So it's really important what these countywide planning policies say. And it's a very short turnaround. It's a 1 month review period. It ends on May 5th. So we are taking it to the City Council on Monday night, the 26th. And King County staff is going to be here, and they're going to talk about the policies, give some background, explain the process, etc. And so we are encouraging you, if you can, to watch that presentation. If you can't, totally understandable, and we will include the link to the YouTube presentation in your May 4th packet. So on May 4th, what we hope to do is kind of what we did with Vision 2050, which is to highlight policies that will be, you know, the countywide planning policies talk about a lot of stuff. And what we want to pull out for May 4th are really the ones that are directly related to land use and housing. So we'll spend time talking about that. And then I was just, if any of you had a chance to look at the links in the packet. I sent out the City Council packet on Friday, so you would have that. But if you had a chance and if you had any initial reactions, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll talk about it in more depth on May 4th.
Anybody have
a lot of stuff in those policies?
Yeah. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Is it okay to go back to the last topic? If nobody has anything on the second memo, or when we're done with that, could we go back to the last topic for just a second? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So does anybody?
It sounds like this would be an okay time because it doesn't sound like anybody has any specific questions for Lori and Debbie right now on the.
Okay. I didn't realize we were, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no worries, Tracy. Go ahead.
I didn't realize, yeah, that we were moving on from all those attachments that were in the first part. I did have a question about the vacant residential parcels attachment and the redevelopable residential parcels attachment. I'm just curious about why there are residential parcels in the critical areas and what that means. Are the overlap areas considered developable, or does that just indicate ownership but not developability? Or yeah, I need some clarity about that.
Right. So it depends. And I know that's not a good answer, but it depends on the type of critical area, what the response is. So for example, in many of the areas that are south of SR 522, the critical area is steep slopes. Along SR 522, much of the critical area is seismic hazard area. And in those areas, there are provisions for some development. If it's a moderate landslide hazard area and you want to cluster some development, say you have a big parcel, if you can cluster your development to a side that's farthest from the critical area, you may be able to develop. The other thing is, by Washington state law, you can't tell someone they can't. You always have to provide an opportunity for development. It's a property rights thing. So if you have a parcel that's 100% in a critical area and it's a single parcel owned by a single person, they have to go through a process called a reasonable use exception. And you can certainly control the size and the extent of the development, but you could not tell them, unless the city was purchasing the property, that they could not put any development on the property. So those two things are in play here. So in those overlap areas, it's really specific to the individual parcel, how much development could occur. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah.
Up along 73rd, for example, there are some really long parcels that extend into the Swamp Creek wetland. Those parcels, by the zoning code, if you may be able to calculate your density on the size of your whole parcel, even though a bunch of it is encumbered by a critical area, but you can move the units up along 73rd where it's not in the wetland or the buffer. And you can build all the units that you would be allowed otherwise up at that spot. So there's not, it's kind of a one size fits all answer.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked that question. I was going to go back to, I thought we were going to come back and talk about the maps. So I have a few questions on clarification too.
Uh-huh.
So starting with the vacant, when I look at this, if I want to look at this map and identify where we have vacant parcels today, would that then be the red and the kind of light blue?
Correct. It would be the non-overlap area and the overlap area, although the red parcels would certainly be more constrained than the lighter blue ones.
Well,
And it's hard, as I'm looking at it, it's hard to distinguish on these maps, that lighter blue color.
Yeah, I kind of was able to tease that out, but my major takeaway, I'll test this with you, is when I look at this, what this tells me is there isn't a lot of vacant land available in Kenmore outside of critical areas.
Well, I think it depends on the part of the city. For example, down in the southeast part, there actually are quite a few vacant parcels. Those aren't critical areas, those little blue parcels. But you're right, overall, it's not like we have huge tracts of vacant land.
So I think that has some takeaway for us when we start thinking about potential for zoning and what would be really effective if we were looking to increase density or we wanted to look for a particular area in which to centralize or concentrate. Vacant land, there isn't any large chunk of vacant land out there that we could point to and say, yeah, let's do it there. Which kind of leads into the second map, which
the second map is actually more likely where we'll see development is on these redevelopable parcels.
Yeah, that was
it's
my conclusion.
One tiny house on a big lot and it's being subdivided.
Yeah. So when I look at, I think that was my takeaway is this map, the redevelopment residential partials map, really shows us where there may be some potential for increased density changing in development, but it's going to be redeveloping property that's already has some sort of use involved. So I think if that's true, then that has some implications for what sort of appropriate zoning we could come up with. And my other takeaway when I look at this is, because again, I think we're looking at the green and the kind of blue, greenish color here. Again, there's a few small concentrations. For the most part, though, it's scattered throughout the city. What I don't know, would be interesting, I can kind of guess, is where's the overlay for single-family residential? And how much of that redevelopment potential is sitting in those areas?
I would say most of it. Really, the city's multifamily areas are pretty much centered around SR 522. They don't extend very far north or very far south.
I think that potentially tells us a lot about where our range of motion is in terms of doing any significant rezoning for new usage or new particular density.
Is there a process that the city uses to determine which are redevelopable residential parcels?
Yeah, it was a formula that the way this process worked to identify capacity, these were the maps that were done for our original capacity work. So the county had standards for when something was considered redevelopable. And off the top of my head, I can't tell you what those were, whether it was one house on a lot that's 5 times bigger, or whether it was related to the assessed value of the house versus the property. I just don't remember. But it was a consistent methodology that was used to identify the redevelopable parcels. And then those were all summed by zoning district, and along with the vacant information used to develop how much residential capacity there is in the city.
Ah, and is that then used as information to tell us what our goals are or our responsibilities?
Right, yeah. And we're going to get into this on May 4th because residential housing unit and jobs targets, those are what we're supposed to plan for to 2044, are part of the countywide planning policies. And to inform that, we looked at, it's called the Urban Growth Study, how much capacity there is. So those documents are actually attached to the city council materials that I sent out on Friday. So if you want to get a jump on that, you can take a look.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Lori, just maybe a quick clarification. This is all for current residential zoning, correct? For these maps?
Well, I'm not following you.
Well, I was, we're talking about vacant or I guess maybe even redevelopable. It doesn't include Lake Point. I know that's very speculative, but that could theoretically be a lot of.
It's because Lake Point is part of the mixed use. It's
right.
On the
Okay.
third map.
That's why I was just kind of clarifying that. Yeah. And
Right.
that's
Right.
obviously that's a whole different subject, but I just wanted to.
Right. So these first 2 maps really are addressing only the city's zones that start with an R.
Yeah.
Residential single family, residential multifamily. And then the third map, which again is centered around downtown, because that's where most of the mixed use is. That commercial mixed use map shows vacant and redevelopable properties based on something done in 2018 for the economic development study. And then we expanded that using the King County methodology to do our calculations.
Gotcha. Okay. So do we, any more about the maps? Those are pretty fascinating and pieces of information, and as are the questions too. I agree very much. Thank you. Any more for us to go over tonight, Lori and Debbie?
No, I don't think so. Again, we're trying to get you as prepared as possible. And I know it might seem a little slow right now, but the pace, I promise you, will pick up.
Okay.
Why does that sound like a threat?
It's more a promise.
I
Mike,
believe
a
you
promise.
do.
All right, we're fair warning. Thank you. Okay. Okay, well, if that's the case, anything more from my colleagues for the good of the order tonight? Anything else anybody wants to bring up? Okay, I think we're good then. Okay, we are adjourned, and we'll see everybody on May 4th.
Good night.
So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye all.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.